Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Rozelle, and I serve as the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government here at George Mason University, and we're very proud to host the Michael V. Hayden Center. It's great to see all of you here this evening toward the very end of the academic calendar year. And we have about 200 persons signed up for both the in-person and the virtual participation in this forum this evening. At last count, participants from 27 states, the District of Columbia, and 10 countries. So a warm welcome to those of you from Australia, Canada, El Salvador, Germany, Italy, Mexico, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. And those of you who are here in person have the added bonus of a nice reception, which will be after the event with our panel members and some of our Schar School community as well. The Hayden Center is a jewel of George Mason University, and the quality of these programs is among the best that you will see in higher education. And we do this with leading policymakers and thinkers committed to addressing the most challenging public policy issues of the day, away from the often overheated debates and discussions in our national politics, so that we can develop informed understandings of key policy issues. This kind of analysis of key issues is needed now more than ever. When the Schar School was founded in 2016, our benefactor, Dwight Schar, expressed the hope for programs such as these that are nonpartisan, non-ideological, and all about good government, good public policy, wherever it comes from, regardless of party or ideology. And with that in mind, the Hayden Center soon after was founded by former NSA and CIA director, the Schar School professor as well, General Michael V. Hayden, who is here tonight. General. The Hayden Center has been a prominent voice in explaining and demystifying intelligence and national security issues. And if you missed some of our past programs, we have all of them on the Hayden Center website and on the YouTube channel. So thank you for attending. Hope to see you here at future events. We're going to have some virtual events this summer. And I now welcome to the stage the director of the Hayden Center, Larry Pfeiffer. Larry?
All right, thank you all for coming. I know it is a busy time of year. It's a beautiful time of year, a little hot today, maybe a little hot, but a beautiful time of year. So the fact that you came to join us today, I would attribute to your interest in hearing from our speaker tonight. Mark discussed what the Hayden Center was, mentioned our founder. What I would just like to mention, if this is the first time you've been to a Hayden Center event and you'd like to know about future events, you can go to our website, haydencenter.gmu.edu. And on the right-hand side, you put your email address and you'll get notifications about our events and nothing else ahead of time, so you can register and be amongst the first to join us. The event is being live streamed on YouTube and it's being recorded. So if you yourself do not want to be on camera, then don't stand in front of a microphone. The Hayden Center's on social media. We like to advertise our events there, but we also like to post items of interest about intelligence and national security. So you can find us on Blue Sky, Threads, not so much Twitter anymore, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So please look for us there and follow us. We would love it. General Hayden is on most of those platforms, as well as am I and Mark Rozelle and David Priess, our moderator. So stay informed by following our different social media. We're going to have time for questions. I know a lot of you are going to came with questions tonight for our ambassador guest. David will indicate when it's time to start lining up. You may have noticed we've got some standing microphones in the two aisles. Just make your way to those microphones when David lets you know it's time, and he'll just call on you, alternating back and forth. We would ask that you keep your questions brief and do keep them in the form of a question. If you have a speech to make, maybe save that for the reception and do that over a drink or two. Let us know who you are, but if you'd like to remain anonymous, that's fine as well. But it is always nice to hear who you are, maybe where you come from, what you represent. If you're a student, love to know that you're a student. Our virtual audience, those of you watching on YouTube, if you'd like to ask a question, please put the question into the live chat forum of YouTube, and we'll be monitoring that. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll take your questions to the microphone as well. Mark mentioned the reception afterwards. There'll be some great food, there'll be some great beverages, and some great conversation, a chance to perhaps have a private chat with our guest, and an opportunity to meet your fellow audience members as well. Tonight, we welcome the ambassador from Sweden, Mr. Urban Ahlin, for a conversation about Sweden, its evolving role on the world stage, and its views on various international security issues affecting the transatlantic alliance, NATO, Sweden, the Nordic region, and the globe. Ambassador Ahlin has been serving here in the United States since the fall of 2023. Before that, he served 4 years as the ambassador to Canada. He is was a member of Parliament, elected in 1994. He served as the Speaker of the Parliament from 2014 to 2018. Prior to that, he was the chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs from 2002 to 2006, and its deputy chair from 2006 to 2014. He's also served as a member of the War Delegation, the Defense Commission, the Committee on European Affairs. He's a member of the Social Democratic Party of Sweden, served as its foreign policy spokesperson at one time in the past, and as a member of the party's executive board. And he's also a founding member of the first pan-European think tank, the European Council on Foreign Relations, founded in 2007. I
think that's enough.
And we'll let him tell you about his hobbies.
There you go.
David Priess will serve once again as our moderator. David is a senior fellow here at the Hayden Center. He's a former CIA analyst, daily intelligence briefer. He's an author, couple of great books, one of which is The President's Book of Secrets, which tells you everything you'd ever want to know that's unclassified about the President's daily intelligence brief. He currently serves as the Director of Intelligence at a company known as Bedrock Knowledge Incorporated. If you're interested in Bedrock and what they could do for you, corner him during the reception, and I'm sure he'll give you some interesting insights into what he could do to help you. So with that, we're going to turn it over to have a really great conversation. Look forward to your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure. I will start out on none of those topics that Larry started with for an unfortunate reason, which is just over a couple of months ago in Örebro, you had what I understand is still and hopefully forever the most serious loss of life in a shooting in Sweden at a school. And we're all too familiar with this in the United States now, but it was absolutely devastating. And I know General Hayden and the rest of us want to put our heart out to you and the Swedish people still for the tragedy that happened there.
Thank you very much.
Yes. We're going to talk about something which is only slightly easier to talk about, which is national security and the challenges that we're facing on the world stage now as allies, which we could not say in exactly that same way a couple of years ago. So on behalf of all of us, welcome to NATO.
Thank you.
It's about time, I should say.
Thank you.
Let's talk about that a bit. Sweden, obviously, for decades has been very cooperative with the United States and with many now NATO allies, but not joining the alliance. The invasion of Ukraine, not in 2014, but a few years ago, actually spurred the joint application, as many saw it, between the Finns and the Swedes. Yeah. Talk through what NATO brings to Sweden. What changes have you seen within public opinion, within the body politic in Sweden since joining NATO?
Can I start a little bit before joining NATO?
Absolutely. I'm
So
thinking
everyone
maybe the
understands.
1500s.
So everyone understands why we are where we are,
Please.
so to say. Because a lot of Americans are asking me, the question: how come you never joined NATO in the beginning?
Yeah.
I mean, Sweden being such a transatlantic, very pro-American country. Businesses are deeply, invested into United States and so on and so on. And I think it's really important to know some facts here. Finland and Sweden were the same country for more than 600 years. We lost Finland in 1809 when we lost against the Russians in a war. So for Swedes, it's a very deep relationship, between Sweden and Finland. And I guess we will speak a little bit about another empire later on, the Russian Empire. And once upon a time, Sweden was actually a pretty big empire in Sweden as well, in Europe as well. So we missed, very much that Finland was taken away from us by the Russians in 1809. And remember, full speed forward until the Second World War, when the Finns were fighting the Russians or the Soviets at that time in two different wars during the Winter War and the Continuation War. And after that, when NATO was formed, I want everyone to understand the kind of the psychological thing in Sweden. Remember how it was. You had the German Marshall Fund, the Marshall help, to the countries. Finland was not allowed to take 1 penny from that Marshall help. Why? Because they had this agreement between the Soviet Union and Finland, solidarity, friendship, blah, 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 agreement, a pact. And for us in Sweden, seeing our neighbor, our half part of our country, as we say sometimes, den andra rikshalvan in Swedish, being under the kind of the Soviet influence like that, so there was no appetite in Sweden for joining NATO. We had managed to stay outside of 2 world wars. We wanted to make it clear that we wanted to support the Finns to be outside of the Soviet influence. So that was the starting point. And that is also the explanation why Sweden and Finland has been working so very hard, close together all over the years, in the Cold War and so on. So that is the understanding why we stayed out. And then when Soviet Union broke down, of course, limits were off. Finland could say goodbye to that agreement with the Soviet Union, with the Russians. We all joined, the Partnership for Peace, came very close to NATO and the cooperation with the United States and so on. At the same time, we had a big defense industry because we wanted to be trustworthy neutrals during the Cold War. So we made our own fighter jets, our own submarines and artilleries and so on. The Finns did the same. And then when, this period here, I would say that I think most people in Sweden felt like we were already part of NATO. We were so close to NATO. But having been outside for so long period of time, being neutral, it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, more or less, that, we have been so successful being outside, okay? And then when the continuation of the invasion continued in Ukraine, you need to remember that already before that, in December, Foreign Minister Lavrov said that I don't want the Finns and the Swedes to be allowed to be members of NATO. That was before they continued the invasion of Ukraine. And already then you could see in the opinion polls, both in Sweden and Finland. Because if you know something about Finland, if you know something about Sweden, and you tell the people of Sweden and Finland that you are not allowed, the reaction is the totally opposite. Who are you to tell us what we, should do? So immediately you could see the opinion polls changing dramatically in favor of joining NATO. And then with the continuation of the invasion of Ukraine and the brutality of Russia, there was 80% support immediately in Sweden for joining NATO. And the same in Finland. And I would like to quote here an old Finnish diplomat, Max Jakobsson, great diplomat. And he was asked once upon a time, the Finnish relationship to NATO, why is it like it is? And he said, if you ask the Finnish people if they would like to join NATO, 80% of the Finns says no. But if you ask the Finns if they think Finland will join NATO one day, 80% will say yes. In the first, it's kind of nostalgia, and the second part is realism. And I think that was actually pretty much the case in Sweden as well. I talked to lots of different party leaders back home in Sweden, and people said, what's going to happen? Will there be lots of turmoil in the opinion? And I said, come on, get real. Most people in Sweden already know that we are very close to NATO, so everyone would say, yeah, done deal.
But it was remarkable to see the whole political spectrum rallying around NATO membership, which didn't seem likely not long before that, given some of the differences on foreign policy.
I think the most important thing was actually that it was a totally unanimous decision in Parliament of sending weapons to Ukraine. And if you would have asked me a couple of years before that, if all political parties from the kind of the left to the right would say that we should send weapons to a country that is at war, I would say I don't think all parties would accept that, but they did. And I think that was an extremely important decision in Parliament, showing that 100% support from left to right. Everyone was in favor of sending weapons to Ukraine. So that was also the starting point of that kind of shift in security policy that a membership of NATO is.
I also have to remark that you, in your opening comments, you've made it sound like Sweden and Finland are hand in hand. And having been in Finland when Sweden and Finland are playing hockey, I must say, it is not always so friendly, is it?
No, it's almost like the game, you know, the Four Nations tournament in hockey between Canada and United States. You know, yeah. When you were a kid, the hockey games between Sweden and Finland was the big event, I have to say. But remember that, you know, funny fact here is actually, if you wonder which two countries have been fighting most wars against each other, it's actually Sweden and Russia in history. And the second most fighting is actually Sweden and Denmark. It's amazing. Sweden and Finland has never fought a war against each other. So remember 600 years of being the same kind of country, having that kind of deep relationship, tradition, culture, and so on, you know, gives a certain feeling. We are great friends to all the Nordics, but a prime minister that is elected, the first trip he does is always to Helsinki.
You referenced earlier that Sweden, in the preceding decades before NATO membership, had been really keeping its defense industrial base. And I think this is something that many Americans, even within the security community, don't fully understand, is how amazing Sweden's defense buildup has been, and the ability to produce some of the world's best fighters and
the best.
There's still, maybe we have a little rivalry there with some of our fighters.
Yeah, you have some planes, I heard.
But let me tell you, and I feel sorry for Russia. Hopefully it doesn't get to this point, but if Russia ever does decide to initiate conflict with NATO, I'll take the American F-35s and the Swedish Griffins against anything Russia puts forward. But I don't think most people realize the strength Sweden has as a defense partner, not just as another member of NATO, but bringing to the alliance such amazing capabilities. Can you talk a little bit about those capabilities and how joining NATO has helped NATO perhaps more than joining NATO has helped Sweden?
I wouldn't say that. That's going too far. But of course, lots of people have, in the intelligence community and the military kind of community, being happy that Sweden and Finland are joining. And I met a lot of senators, I have to say, when I was here, saying that I'm so happy that I can go home to my electorate and tell them that Finland and Sweden is joining NATO, because everyone understands that they are security providers. They are not consuming security. And if you look, I don't want to be nasty against other countries, but if you look at the NATO enlargement in the last years, it has been countries that, of course, are trying to provide security, but in reality, they are most consuming the security. And for lots of American senators, of course, it's much easier to go home and tell the electorate that, hey, we are bringing in new guys that are actually contributing. And we are proud of that. And I would say both Sweden and Finland. But I have to admit, though, when you talk so nicely about Sweden, I'm partly to be blamed. Because what you heard before in this long introduction about me, I was also a member of the Defense Review Commission, where we looked upon how should we change the defense and so on. And it's done in a parliamentary review commission. All political parties are there. We're having a discussion. We are putting forward proposals to the government, which the government more or less 99% fulfill. And, you know, we went to United States, and people told us here that, oh, you know, territorial defense, that's so 1900. Artillery, what do you need that for? You know, trenches and mines and stuff. Oh, no. Nowadays, it's expeditionary, being far away, you know, and have firepower and logistics. You need to move people back and forth, you know, to Afghanistan or Iraq. And I have to admit that I listened a little bit too much to people from Pentagon and others. So we came home and said, hey, we really need to change our military from being territorial defense focused to be more expeditionary. If I compare myself to my Finnish colleagues, they said, we have a border with Russia that is 800 miles long. I think we keep our artillery, our soldiers, our men, like that. And I have to admit, they were right. I was wrong. So Sweden actually changed a lot of its military into something we thought was very important, expeditionary. The good part was, though, that when we put these Nordic battle groups or sending people to Afghanistan or Iraq, we had them really tested. Yeah. So we knew what is working, what is not working. That was good. But if you look in hindsight, the Finns, I have to say, made a much better job than us, preparing themselves. When it comes to the defense industry, it was the same there. After the Soviet Union fell down, everyone said, oh, wow, this is 1,000 years of peace. Everyone is happy. So we need to do something with the peace dividend. And the dividend was that we should lower the cost for the defense. Everyone did that. And no one was buying our weapons from our defense industry. So we also needed to see how can we focus, what is the most important areas that we would like to continue on. So we looked into what are our specific national security interests. And that's why we came up with, yes, we want to make our own fighter jets. Yes, we want to have full control under the bottom of the Baltic Sea. So we continue to do submarines, We want to be very high tech. So network, command and control structures and so on. We want to continue being good at that. And Nokia and Ericsson come from Sweden and Finland. So we are pretty good when it comes to mobile communications and networks like that. So we focus very much on that. And I think you all, if you remember something from this, that the ambassador told me that what we really focused on was that we wanted to have total control over the Baltic Sea. The sea east of us, that is between Sweden and Russia. We want to know what is going on under the surface, on the surface, and over the surface. So everything, that kept us on top of things there, that's what we was focusing on. And everything, the Finns have a wonderful defense industry as well, So we are working very tight together. And I think, it's like this, that even before we became members of NATO, Sweden and Finland had a lots of cooperation when it comes to defense industry. We also have that with all the Nordics. We have something called NORDEFCO, where the Nordics have this defense cooperation where we talk to each other and see, okay, what do we need? What can we build together and how can we do it? But with Finland, it has always been a little bit deeper. So even when it came, to contingency planning, operational planning, and so on, can be said today, Sweden and Finland worked a lot together, so we knew what was going to happen and how can we help each other if something is going south.
You mentioned the geopolitics of the Baltic, and we conveniently have a map behind you that shows the Baltic prominently. The situation you describe with understanding what's happening, under the water, on the water, above the water, there's been a lot of headlines in the last few years about what they could be called hybrid attacks or covert operations that the Russians have been doing in and around the Baltic. Everything from cutting cables or appearing to cut cables to sabotage operations around the Baltic Sea. I have to say, there's a bit of a disconnect there between feeling a sense of control and having some of this reporting come out about what the Russians are pushing and trying to find ways through it. How do you envision that? How do you look at the threat to the Baltic Sea, which Sweden, with its neighbors, shares a lot of responsibility for protecting?
Okay, I think the best expert on cables is actually sitting down here, the former Lithuanian ambassador to Sweden. That is working very much on it. So in the reception afterwards, he's the person to talk to. But if I can make a little bit of a context here, I think it's important to understand that even the Swedish constitution is built on two things. It's peace or it's war. So when it's peace, we do things in a certain way. If it's war, we do it in a different way. there is no gray zone between there, peace or war. The Russians have always seen it in a totally different way. It is full war, or it's just a little bit of war. Yeah. And I mean, they can move freely between these 2 points, And that's what they are doing. With the hybrid threats, doing things, cyber attacks, and so on, right? So and this is absolutely true. I mean, if you talk to Russians, they see it as a constant struggle. They have never accepted something that if we cooperate, we can both win. No. There's always a zero-sum game in the Russians' attitude, So if we negotiate, one of us win and the other one lose. And that is the attitude they have. And that has created lots of trouble for us because we don't want to go from peace and tell the population that, we are now at war at the Russians because something happened in the Baltic Sea or, our computers were suddenly hacked and so on. And I was the speaker of the Swedish parliament before, and we looked in, I don't know how much I can say about this actually, but if you look at the German Bundestag, the German parliament, they were hacked. They had to throw out all the computers and start all over again. Norway had the same problem. So when I was a speaker, we focused a lot on this. And we were logging everything, using everything. And as I said before, Finland and Sweden is pretty advanced when it comes to high tech. And I'm not telling any secrets if I say that we were attacked, many times every day. And the suspects are the ones that you think about. Absolutely. So, how to deal with this is actually pretty hard for democratic societies. How do you, fight someone that is using hybrid things against you? It's not really a military attack. It's something between. And as a democracy, how do you respond to that? Do you respond by saying, they were the guys who did it, and you think they are ashamed? No, they aren't. Because for them, it's not a cost at all to do it, right? So it's a very, very complicated how you deal with it. And personally, I think we are coming to a point, and now I'm speaking totally personally, okay? Totally personally. This is not the Swedish government view, yet at least, that when someone is doing a cyber attack or a hybrid threat, and we can be pretty sure who did it, I think it's time that they feel the burn. Yeah. It has to be a cost to it. It's not enough, that we attribute and say, they were the ones doing it. I think we really need to understand that it has to be a cost to it. It can look different. We can switch Moscow down, or you can do something else. But it has to be a reaction in the future, I think, because they're using this all the time against us. We also have to say that cables can be cut by accidents as well. If we look at the Mediterranean and the Baltic Sea, we know that it happens sometimes with very bad seamanship, old ships that have broken anchors, or what do you call that keeps the anchor hanging? What is that? The kind of what is it? The chain. Do you say chain? You don't say chain, do you? Okay, yeah. The anchor chain, bad things, drops, and so it's not always, even though media is talking about it like it is in sabotage or something. Sometimes it's only about bad seamanship, but you're absolutely right. And I think we have a little bit of a control over what is going on. Remember that we have prepared ourselves for it. Lithuania is a very good example that we knew that the Baltic states were heavily dependent on electricity from Russia. We didn't like that they were dependent on that, so to say. They could easily be blackmailed, or what you called, extorted because of the Russians saying, we're going to switch off your electricity production. So all Nordic countries created a kind of a Baltic ring and Baltic Sea ring, connecting them with electrical cables over the Baltic Sea and so on. And there is a wonderful redundancy in the system, so if something breaks down, something else kicks in. So it's pretty much like that when it comes to internet cables and so on. We have had certain cuts of different optic fibers going over the the Baltic Sea, under the Baltic Sea. But since all the Nordic countries and the Baltic countries are working together and we know that these things can happen, there is a lot of redundancy in the system as well. So, I mean, some of the times when it happens, it's only a couple of few seconds where you don't have any internet, and so the system is changing it, right? So I don't want to make it as a big thing. We should be vigilant. We need to be prepared to repair it, to check it out, and have a little bit more of surveillance over the area. But it's a big thing, but it's not that super big. Ukraine is a big thing.
I want to drill down on Ukraine by coming at it through a couple of angles.
Yep.
One is, and these are both things that are recently different in Swedish national security policy. One is the presence of Swedish military forces in the multinational brigade in Latvia right now. So I'd love to hear about the experience, what Sweden has learned from that experience and how that's gone along. And then secondly, something in the United States, the agreement now, I think almost a year old, with the New York National Guard, and the fact that you have exchanges and cooperation at that very personal, very face-to-face level going on, that is also new and different. So to the extent you can talk about those experiences and how they're going.
Sure. First of all, the experiences we have being part of NATO, I mean, everyone in the Swedish military and also among the diplomats that are dealing with it, everyone is surprised that it goes so seamless that we are joining NATO. And no wonder. I mean, we have been working very close with NATO for many years. We have been out in different military operations together and so on. So I can't say that, we have learned a ton of things being in Latvia together with other NATO countries. Of course, it's another structure, the command and control system and so on. But I would say the lessons we already learned in the 90s and in 2000, so to say, right? When it comes to the state partnership program between New York National Guard and the Swedish military, I think that is extremely good. We are very happy about how it develops. And I think you could look upon it from different angles. I mean, we talked about JAS Gripen. The National Guard of New York, they have F-35. Here is an opportunity for us, to see how can we work seamlessly together between our fighter jets and F-35. So that is one project that we're working on, and that's a perfect kind of mix between New York State and us. Another area which is very important is that New York is the financial center. How do you protect that? Stockholm is the financial center of the Northern Europe. How do you protect that? How do you plan for it and so on? New York has a great harbor that is extremely important and port that is extremely important. Gothenburg and Stockholm is important ports as well. How do you, protect Gothenburg? So I know that the National Guard is going to Gothenburg to check out how do we deal with it, how do we work with that and so on. And one thing, as I said, I'm to blame for this. We decreased the number of soldiers. So doing big exercises with lots of people, we haven't done that for a long period of time in Sweden because of people like me that said that, we don't need so many people, to go to Afghanistan and so on. The Finns, they have done big exercises all the time, right? But now with the National Guard that have this experience of doing big exercises and so on, that's marvelous for us to have that cooperation. And there is another cooperation that I would like to highlight, and that is also the Defense Cooperation Agreement between Sweden and the United States. That was negotiated in record time, no problem whatsoever. And if you compare to other defense cooperation agreements, Sweden has accepted 17 different sites where the Americans can pre-store, exercise, or do other things, And the reason behind that, if you look at the map, Sweden is pretty much north to south. So in a geostrategic point of view, our country is perfect. And now we're talking about Russia. Okay, we have to be honest about that. So Finland is at the border to Russia. Sweden is a little bit behind. We have that strategic depth. So we are the perfect place, to bring in things from UK, from United States into Norway, send it further to 17 different sites in this kind of country that is very north to south, and from there distributed to the front line. So I think in that case, Sweden is actually bringing something to NATO, not even without a bullet. We are bringing our landscape, our geography to it, and it's actually pretty good for the defense of the Northern Europe, just if you look at the map. And that cooperation is also working perfectly fine. So that's really good. As you see, there is lots of turmoil in the world. There is lots of discussion about what is going on in the relationship between US and Europe and so on. But I can assure you that when it comes to the partnership program, the National Guard, the cooperation we had with the military, the defense cooperation agreement, it works perfect.
Let's shift to Ukraine specifically. Sweden's support for Ukraine has been steady and very serious, especially on a per capita basis.
Yeah.
Talk about that and talk about what you see happening now. We're entering the time where each of the last few years we've had a spring or summer offensive.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of Russian activity along the entire front, but no real point of emphasis or breakthrough in recent weeks. What does that tell you about the evolution of this war and the Ukrainians' ability to continue to defend themselves, perhaps with wavering support from some quarters?
I think we should start a little bit earlier in the discussion, but the answer to your question is that Ukraine can win this war any month. It actually depends on how much support we give them. I mean, simple as that. Russia is not stronger than Europe and North America together, period. And I'm actually frustrated every day that a country that has an economy of Spain can produce more weapons than Europe and North America at the moment. And that is because they are on a war footing, and we are not. And I don't think we should be on a war footing, but our market economy, our dynamism, our production should be much stronger than theirs. So it's all about the political will, to be honest with you. That's what I really think. If we go back, and I travel a lot to, as you know, I was a politician before, and I came into parliament when Soviet Union broke down. I was traveling around like a young politician to the former Soviet Union countries. I was a jumping frog, as they say in Russian, traveling around like a jumping frog, trying to kind of, it sounds crazy today, okay? But have you heard about globalization, right? Have you heard about, the market economy winning over the planning economy? Because at that time in the 90s, we all believed that globalization was good, free trade was good, the economy is growing, you will have a middle class in the country, the middle class will ask for human rights, they will ask for democracy, and by that, everyone will be more happy, okay? I believe that 100%. I still believe in globalization. I think the problem with globalization is that we don't reach out to everyone. So I was traveling around. We had this very optimistic view, war is gone. Now it's time, to have this kind of wonderful cooperation between the countries. Let's bring in China, have them in WTO. Let's help the Russians create their market economy and everything will be solved. So I was part of that. I was traveling around like, this frog, okay? And I will give you a little bit of a personal, and I see some of you in the audience have heard me saying this before, so I'm sorry that I'm repeating myself. But I want to give some anecdotes from my own life, okay? I was a strong believer in this. I loved the Russians, there was fun, the language is wonderful, the literature, the culture is fun, and I really thought I had an historical kind of purpose bringing the Russians into kind of a European context. And I met lots of Russian Duma members and Russian politician think tankers that were wonderful. So I brought lots of Duma members to Sweden. They studied the pension system, labor market, freedom of speech, how the TV was organized and so on. I think I personally have sent more than 100 Duma members to Sweden to study and see what's going on. And I travel back and forth to Moscow all the time. And I stayed in a hotel, National, next to the Duma. That's where Lenin was after the revolution. So I actually quite often stayed in exactly the same hotel room as Lenin had after the revolution. And that room was actually blown out by the Chechen terrorists when they went down Tverskaya, and they should have taken left and bombed the Duma, but they ran to the right, and they dropped the bomb just outside. And I'm saying that because I actually checked out just a couple of hours before. So that was, pure luck, I have to say. But still, I went to the Duma. I could say, hey, and the guards told me, oh, hey, Urban, are you here again? And I said, yeah. What are you going to do? Yeah, I'm going to meet Dima or whatever, So I just walked in and I went up and the escalators up to the restaurant they have, ordered some borscht, and was sitting there talking to Russian Duma members. Lovely times. But the first time I started to question it, it was in that restaurant. I was sitting there waiting for some friends and a Russian Duma member, and I have lost track of him, but you can check him out. His name was Vladislav Vladislavlev. And he was at that time, the party was called Jedinstva. Today is Jedina Rossiya, so it's kind of Putin's power party. And he had been to Sweden many times. So he tells me that, I love what you're doing, Urban. It's really nice of you, taking Duma members to Sweden and to study things. But it won't work. And I'm like, what do you mean? What don't work? No, I understand what you're trying to do, but, it won't work. And I said, hey, explain it to me. Why wouldn't it work? And remember now, we are living in 2000 when we all thought that free market economy, liberalism, middle class would solve everything, right? And he tells me, yeah, I know you're trying to make us kind of a European country, but it won't work. And I said, okay, explain me why. And he said, the problem is that the Mongols beat the out of us. They enslaved us. We have never had any property rights. We have never owned a single piece of property. Everything has always belonged to the state. In your country, Urban, the state is for the people. In my country, the people is for the state. And we have always been fighting poverty by killing the rich. And I remember, how I was sitting there and like, shit, he might be right. He might be right. Maybe it doesn't work. And that was the first time when I really felt like, something is going wrong. The other one was when I was with my wife on a vacation in Moscow. And I was invited by Gleb Pavlovsky, who at that time was the spin doctor of Putin. And I went into his office and I saw all these pictures of Putin, and things. And I was sitting there for a whole day. And he explained to me what he wanted to create in Russia. And basically, bear with me, very short. Russia doesn't have any narrative. We don't know who we are. What is the Russian identity? We feel like losers. Our leaders have been begging for help from the West. We want to be in the rightful place in the world. We want to be respected. So we need to have, Urban, a national identity. And that's what we are looking forward to do. And that was the starting point of this kind of riding the nationalistic tiger. Yeah. And from there on, I realized that, all this talk that Russians had about we need our rightful place back in the world. The way they looked on Belarus, like a potato-eating country that we can easily take over whenever. The attitude on Ukraine. And as you know, in the Russian language, you should say grammatically, the Ukrainia. But the Russian says, na Ukrainia. And Ukraine means the borderlands. Even in their language, Ukraine belongs to Russia. Right? If you go down in the metro, in the subway in Moscow, and you come to a wonderful metro station, Ukrainia, you can see a picture, where it says na Ukrainia and so on. It's pretty clear, right? So Putin started riding this nationalistic tiger, was very successful, had a very strong support. And even the Russian youngsters started, to believe that the future is not really in this degraded Europe. We need something else, right? And the Olympic Games in Sochi, if you look at the kind of the show before Sochi starts, it's actually Putin telling you what kind of country do we want. You don't see any gays, you see, families, and you see kids, and the whole story of Russia is there, and also the future of Russia is shown in this Sochi Olympic game. And I think basic is that we should have listened to what Putin was saying. He has talked about Novaya Russia. He has been pretty clear about what he wants, of territorial expansion. So it shouldn't have come as a surprise to us. But Georgia, South Ossetia, Crimea, we were sitting there in the West and felt like, don't destroy the wonderful dream I have about everyone wants to be the same and, we will have this wonderful cooperation. So no one was really ready, to pull the plug and say, hey, that's the red line. What are you doing? Yeah. But when the continuation of Ukraine continued, I must say that I'm pretty proud that Europe, North America were so united in the response against the Russians, and also having support from lots of Pacific countries or, Indo-Pacific countries like Australia, Japan, South Korea, and so on. That's really good. And I think, honestly, I'm absolutely certain, rather, that Putin believes this will be a walk in the park. We're just going to roll them over, and the West will sit there, and what happened? So I think he's pretty surprised, actually, about the strong response from us. But, all discussions that we have about the situation at the time is frustrating for me because, as I said, the Ukrainians has been fighting heroically against the Russian war machine. You can see it every day, with the missiles being thrown in on civilians in the big cities. What irritated me was when we told them that, hey, you have a weapon, but you're not allowed to use that to fight the Russians on the Russian territory. I mean, I can go back to my own political life in Sweden. If we were at war with someone, and you gave me a weapon and told me that I'm not allowed to fight them on their territory, you can only defend yourself. Think about that. Sitting there in Kiev, and the only thing you can do is kind of trying to stop all the missiles from coming in. You're not allowed to hit them. I mean, come on. And that was the beginning of it all. That was how we dealt with it, right? So I think the Ukrainians have done an enormous, great job. And they are super united, to fight the Russians here. And we should look ourselves in the mirror and say, have we done enough to help them? And I think that is the discussion we should have, not about, will this spring offensive and what's going to happen and so on. They have done a wonderful job. They have a strong support, and it's actually up to us to show respect and pay up.
I was struck as you were talking about the attitude toward Russia in the 1990s and the aughts. If you took Russia out of that discussion and you said, so there's a big country, powerful military, we're hoping to bring it into the international system and bind the economy, but they may not share our values on democracy and human rights, and what should we look the other way on? And that kind of sounds like China now, right? Yes. And yet China is in a position, but Sweden, like many countries, is growing trade with China and importing more at the same time that there are these massive security challenges involving China, some of them technological, some of them territorial, but many of them having to do with core values of democracy and human rights. How do you add up the relationship with China, especially given what we've seen happening with Russia?
Yeah, I can only go back to myself, because the same view we had on Russia, that they will become a modern, normal country, that was exactly the same view we had on China. That's why we let them into the World Trade Organization. That's why we wanted to trade with them more, because we believed that the Communist Party and the Communist China will not have a chance to survive when we have a middle class and we have an economic growth in the country. Oops, it turned out we were wrong. Think about it. If you remember, we spoke about internet, right? The social media. Wow, they're going to penetrate China. It's not possible for a Communist Party to keep control over such a big country with social media and internet. Remember? Hey, today we are afraid that they are controlling us through the social media. So it's an enormous shift from what we believed and what has happened, okay? So I think we need to understand that for a communistic party in China, it's much easier to keep control than we believed. That people get more money, live a more of a middle-class life, is not equal, I ask, for democracy. And that is a kind of an awakening for us. I have to say that. And when I'm out speaking at universities, talking to political science students and so on, I'm telling them, I was wrong. I really believe that. That, with market economy, liberalism, economic, growth, middle class, they will ask for democracy, human rights, everything will be solved. It turned out not to be true. So the next students now, they need to come up with another idea. And I don't think, and I have to say this now, that I was very much in the camp, and I am still, that we should promote democracy, human rights, universal values. I don't believe in an attitude where we say it's impossible. No. Every people in this world really would like to have, democracy, human rights, and a good life. But tradition, religion, political oppression, and so on, it's much stronger than we believe. So the question is, how to deal with this in the future. And China is absolutely correct. Okay, full speed forward. Could we just isolate China and say, hey, we don't care about this big country over there? No. They have a strong economy at the moment. They're producing lots of stuff. And absolutely, Swedish company has also invested in production in China. We are importing more than we are exporting. And we talked about the Baltic states before. When I was a speaker, I had the honor to deliver the National Day address, a speech to the Swedish people. So to say, we have a big event in Stockholm and it's broadcasted. And one of the things I actually said, and I think you were the ambassador down for Lithuania, where I said, a lot of talk about China and the economics and our export to China. Actually, the export to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania is higher than our export to China. And I think it's important here to understand that Sweden, and let's say it like this, the Nordic countries has been a little bit different than many others. You remember the Nord Stream, the gas pipeline from Russia to Germany, goes through our economic zone. Sweden said, we are not really happy about this. We don't like this pipeline to go here. Did we hook ourselves up to this cheap Russian gas? No, even though it went through our economic zone. Other countries did because they felt it was great for their industry. We have another story. I told you, 2 countries have been fighting most wars against each other, Sweden and Russia. We have a long tradition of having Swedish industry long before, the Soviet Union investing in Russia and losing all the money. And that's even before Soviet Union time. Ericsson, I told you about the Ericsson company. They had a big factory in Stockholm and one big in Leningrad in St. Petersburg at that time. And they were not happy about the Swedish taxation system. And this was in the 1910. And they actually, threatened the Swedish government that they're going to close down in Stockholm and move everything to St. Petersburg. And then you had the Russian Revolution, and the factory in St. Petersburg was nationalized, and that's it. So they were happy that they stayed in Stockholm. So we have a long tradition of being a little bit cautious about, Russia. It's the same with China. Swedish companies has not been investing as much as others in China. Swedish companies are actually investing in the United States. Believe it or not, we are a country of 10.5 million people. We are the 10th biggest investor into American economy. 10th biggest investor. 380,000 Americans are directly employed by a Swedish company in the United States. 2023, the latest statistics, we were the 3rd biggest investor in your manufacturing industry, only beaten by Canada and Japan. So, the Nordics and especially Sweden, I would say, has invested very much in the relationship with the United States. So China, what are we doing? We cannot decouple. Forget it. They're too big. What we can do is de-risking. We can look upon, okay, what kind of technology do we have that we don't want them to have? How do we prevent us from them spying on us, doing all the nasty stuff they are doing on in the technology sphere and so on. You have here Salt Typhoon and things in your network if you have read about that, right? Things like that. We need to be vigilant. We need to understand. We need to de-risk. Absolutely. But the answer to this question is that if we believe that North America and Europe should not work together to fight countries, on this sphere, we are totally wrong. I mean, the whole system, we have to be honest, the whole system is built on norms and standards that United States, Canada, and the European countries have come together and, made. Some countries like China, Russia, and others, they don't like that system. They think it's rigged against them. And actually, it's rigged in favor of transparency, open market economy, and democracies. And they don't like that. And so the most important thing when it comes to China, Russia, whatever, is that we stick together. Right. If North America and Europe is not sticking together, we're going to lose. If we stick together, we have a good chance of winning this.
I do want to go to some questions from the audience, but before we do, something you said a moment ago was very powerful, and I want to pick up on it. You talked about very openly, very proudly, saying, I was wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I recall you were a teacher before you entered politics?
Yeah, I was a teacher in math.
Physics, yeah. Because I'm struck by the fact that in much of American education, we train students. There are many students here and many more on the live stream. We tend to train students to advocate for a point they believe in and then write an essay saying all the reasons they're right, instead of critically thinking and trying to argue for the other side to understand those arguments better. And we certainly don't train each other to be proud of being wrong and learning from our mistakes.
I'm not proud of being wrong.
Talk through in your experience as a teacher, as a member of parliament, as a diplomat.
Okay.
What can students hear from you saying, you know what, sometimes it is best to admit when you're wrong, and that ends up being better for you. Talk through that.
I was a teacher in math.
Yeah.
And there is one thing, interesting you asking this question. I've never been asked that before. But I think actually there is one thing that I have been thinking of myself. Has that been a benefit in my kind of political career, in my life? And I think being a teacher in math is that you understand the numbers, and you can easily see the kind of the minimum point and the maximum point. So the kind of the minimalistic outcome or the maximalistic outcome. And so that's what I do all the time, now as well when I'm a diplomat. When we're discussing things, Lena and I, at the embassy, I'm always thinking, okay, what is the minimum? What is the maximum? What is affecting each other here? And I think that experience being a math teacher has actually helped me a lot to immediately, try to see that kind of maximum, minimum, where is it reasonable to be? And if we move a little bit too much in that side, what kind of effects will it have? So connecting the dots and knowing the min and max, I think that is, if I should, brag a bit, I think I'm pretty good at these two things. Okay?
Yeah.
Being a politician, when I became a member of parliament, I had a quote from an old member of my political party telling me, and it's actually a little bit like Reagan. You remember when he said that facts has this terrible, annoying, thing that it glues there. It's kind of stick, So if you're saying something else, it's not good. The facts are sticky, right? And I have always said that truth is an underestimated weapon in politics. And think about it. I have used that many, many times in debates or, when I have been interviewed by a journalist, because the worst you can do is not telling the truth. If you are, a little bit kind of hiding away from something, you will be criticized not because of something going wrong, but that you hid something. And sometimes, politicians are a little bit afraid of really telling the truth. And the truth is often for a politician is that, yes, I know this decision is not 100% right. I had to look at it at the min and max view, and I decided to be over here. I did this kind of decision after looking into all these parameters. It's not as sexy as saying, oh yeah, this is the right policy, go for it, But it's pretty powerful when you tell people as it is. Yeah. So I think that is actually another advice from my side, that truth is underestimated as a political weapon.
Yeah.
Seriously, yeah.
Yeah.
If you ask me if I like to be a diplomat or a politician, he said that when we walked out here. If it's better to be a member of parliament or a diplomat. If I could choose, I mean, I'm done with politics. After 24 years in parliament, I'm done. But 24/7, I would choose to be an elected official, as you say in US, a politician. That's a contact sport. It's fun. Every day, boom, boom, boom. Every day you're thinking about how can I come up with some smart, creative thing, to think, and make a noise. And you are in the middle of it all. So youngsters here, join politics. It's extremely fun, and you learn a lot.
While people make their way to the microphones, just one comment on what you just said about the minimum and the maximum. Yeah. And you take that from being a math teacher. But that's the business, those of us who are in intelligence, that's the business of intelligence, is describing to policymakers, based on our assessment of the realities on the ground, there's a cone of uncertainty. You're not going to be able to operate outside of that.
Yes.
And here are the lines on the field that you are able to play in.
Yeah.
So very similar in that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
We'll start going to questions. We'll start with Professor Katz.
Thank you. Mark Katz, Professor Emeritus here at the George Mason Schar School. I'm just wondering, how do you read President Trump's attitude toward NATO? Is he critical of NATO members in order to get them to spend more because that's his end goal, he'll be satisfied? Or is he critical of NATO because he really doesn't like it and he wants to withdraw the U.S. from it? And I'm sort of wondering how he's seen, in Sweden and elsewhere in Europe. And because if it's one, then there's a solution: spend more. If it's the other, in fact, one can worry that if one spends more, then he might hope that you don't need U.S. anymore. How do you read him? What does he want from NATO? Thanks.
You wish you were a politician and not a diplomat.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Didn't we agree on it should not be about, yeah. Sorry. I think it is like this, that big countries have a tendency sometimes that they want to use that they are big countries. A big country can push small countries around by lots of different means. An organization like NATO is an organization where we have accepted that, okay, we work together. It is an organization where we all need to agree on things. We all have a veto, so to say, even though maybe the United States have a bigger veto than others in NATO, but still, it's based on a common decision making. So I think I don't know. I mean, let's say like this. If you look at Trump, his history, what he has said in his books and so on, how he wants to make deals, he goes very much on the maximum line and then, settle for less. And I think that is what we see in lots of areas. And I would also like to say that we were not wrong in the 90s when we were rethinking NATO. How could we bring the Russians in? We had this Russia-NATO partner, joint council, dealing with how to, bring the biggest enemy into it. There was not wrong thinking like that. But as we learned, Russia was not willing to be like us, and they are now a threat to us, right? Europeans should have seen that earlier. I should have seen that earlier. And I can say proudly that I think I was one of the first politicians that spoke actually up on this. Lena, my defense counselor, was former Secretary General of an organization we call People and Defense that organize events where academia, politicians, militaries come together. Youth organizations and others are there. And I remember clearly one of the events when Lena asked me up, and I told that I'm not so sure about this, that we should tell the taxpayers that our defense is for Afghanistan, that our defense starts in Afghanistan. I think we really need to tell the taxpayers, no, the defense starts here. The money you are paying is an insurance to protect ourselves, not being in Afghanistan. I think I was one of the first politicians actually saying that. But still, I was too late. Yeah. And we should, and I'm not saying Trump is right about this, because it's not that Europe now is paying more because of Trump. It is because we see Russia as a threat. The Nordic countries and the Baltic countries see it more than a threat than many others. And that you can easily see how much we spend on defense and our defense industry and so on. The Baltic countries and Poland is aiming for 5% already now. Sweden has decided to go up to 3.5% and so on. Yeah. So I think from a kind of a deal-making standpoint, being a leader of a big country, I can easily understand that sometimes the feeling is that, it's so complicated working with this big organization. It would have been much easier if I could have dealt with Finland, then Sweden, and then Norway, and others. And I think that that's there, but I have to say that in real terms, in reality, we don't see any signs of the United States walking away from NATO and Article 5. We are absolutely clear and certain that Article 5 is valid, and we absolutely trust the Americans to come to our rescue, as I hope you are trusting that we come to your rescue.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. Since I was already advertised, so Eitvydas Bajarūnas.
You were attributed.
Attributed. Eitvydas Bajarūnas, Lithuanian former ambassador to many places, including Sweden, Russia, currently at SIPA writing about Russia's hybrid threat for 1 year. So I was really illuminated when David said, do you want to come to the lecture? Do you know him? I said, of course I know, I want to come. And I'm really happy to be here. So many other things which I didn't know about you, Urban. You told about Russia. But my question, European Union was not mentioned. I not want to go in all aspects. It would take another lecture. But very much follow-up of the previous question about NATO's role. Yeah. What we in the EU can do on defense. And this is very much also very tricky. If we do too much, then Americans say, oh, no, you can do on your own. If we do too little, then it's... So what is this right balance for us? How much we should invest in the EU, in the coupling of NATO, individually, strategic autonomy, which once French were advertised. So yeah. EU and defense. Thank you.
Great question. If I go back as a teacher in math, I don't really understand why we have this discussion so much about percentage here and there, because what NATO should look at is actually what kind of capacities do we need? Yeah. How does the threat look like? What do we need to counter that threat? And that's it, if we are really serious, and that costs 5%, or 4%, or 7%, I don't know. But it should be based on the facts. What are the capacities that we need to have to be kind of scaring the enemy away, so we're not, starting any wars against us, because that's what it is about. Preventing war. That's what NATO is about. And then, of course, we need to have the capacity. So that's my starting point. I really hope now, before the meeting in Hague, that NATO is doing a wonderful job in finding the capacities, and have that kind of standards or that goal. And then start the discussion with the member countries that what do we need to pay to reach these goals, okay? You all hear that it's about 5%. Should it be 5% military? Should it be 3.5% military, and the rest can be something else? That is out there and discussed, but it should be based on the facts. Europe should definitely do more together. I think there are lots of initiatives taken that is very good. And the most important, in my view, is that we crank up the defense industrial production. Europe can do a lot when it comes to that. I'm very optimistic about Germany. Whatever you say about Germany, we can, make fun of them for gas or whatever, but they are the industrial engine of Europe. And they are enormously good in producing. They are wonderful engineers. And if they got their engine up and running, so to say, they are a force to count on. And I actually think they will be. I mean, what the new government have done in the negotiations with the other parties, coming up with a solution that they're going to, borrow money, do this, what is necessary when it comes to defense, but also to industrial production. I think that will have an enormous impact. The problem you are pointing at is that you have Europeans talking about strategic autonomy, which is kind of a red flag for Americans because it sounds like, we don't want to deal with Americans any longer. You can hear leaders sometimes saying, okay, we hear some other tones from Washington. Maybe we need to be able to do everything ourselves. I don't know if this is the government's view of my own government, but let's say it's my personal view here. I think all of that is BS. We are totally dependent on each other. Europe will never be able to create that kind of defense that is needed. And even though US is the biggest, strongest military, if you take out Europe from that, you are not any longer. So it's time for us to wake up and understand that we are totally interdependent of each other. So even though some European countries might talk about strategic autonomy, it will never happen. It can't happen. We are so intertwined between the United States and Europe. Do I think it's good? No. In Sweden, we talk about the strategic capacity, that Europe should have the capacity to do things strategically if US says, thank you very much, but we're not interested in doing this. Europe should still have the strategic capacity to do things, right? So in a view, I see it like this, that NATO is the military kind of command and control, telling the countries what to do and how to do things. And EU will be very much of a producing capacity in the future. We are maybe, let's say that we all know that this administration is looking into how to decrease the presence in Europe and focusing more on Indo-Pacific or the threat on China. I think that is absolutely okay, as long as we do it in a coordinated manner. We want the Americans to tell us, okay, this is our plan. We want to do this, and we can say, okay, let's see what we can do to fill the gap, to help each other out. And that is what we need to do in Europe as well. Okay, we're going to strengthen our capacity. How can we do that hand in hand with the Americans? So we combined strengthen our capacities. And I think we are in a good way to do that. Honestly, I'm very optimistic. If you would have asked me 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been as optimistic as I am now. I really see that Europe is getting its acts together. Absolutely. And sorry to tell you, it's not because of American, pushing us or Trump pushing us. It is that we see ourselves, what Russia is doing, and we need to be able to defend ourselves, okay? We want to do it with you, and we want to be able to do it if you say no, okay? We do trust NATO, but we also need to have the strategic capacity as well in Europe, okay?
Thank you.
So a question from our YouTube audience.
Yeah.
This first question drills in a little bit more on the Ukraine conversation. And you did mention Sweden and Russia have had more wars than any two countries have ever had. So from your perspective, what will it take for Russia to agree to peace with Ukraine? Will it require major territory loss by Ukraine? And are there perhaps lessons from the post-World War II Baltic situation that we can take?
Okay, yeah, a wonderful question, but I would put it differently. I was once upon a time politician, so you always reframe the question. Honestly, I think there are lessons to learn. One is that land grab should not be granted. We live in a world where military might is not right. We learned from the Second World War, that we don't want countries to invade each other and being, having benefit from it, right? And what we also learn is that if it's going to be a lasting, just peace, it cannot be negotiated among others than the two that are involved. So in the end of the day, with all this question about, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, it's up to the Ukrainians. And we need to understand that. I mean, I would have been furious, honestly speaking to you, as a Swede, if someone attacked us, invaded us, and then someone else tells us that, oh, you should give away Gotland or Skåne or Stockholm, It's up to us. And I mean, the Ukrainians are smart people. They know what the neighbors are. They know Russia. And they know how to deal with it, okay? They are fighting in the trenches. They are fighting. They are hitting them on the nose. And I'm absolutely sure that the Ukrainians and the Russians, when the Russians feel that this costs more than we benefit from it, they will come to the negotiation table, and the Ukrainians will find also a solution. What that solution is, it's not up to me. It's up to the Ukrainians. But that's where it has to be. And compared to many others, I actually think the Ukrainians are ready to talk. And they are ready to make a deal. But how it looks like, it's up to them. I think the time is over when land grabs were premiered, so to say. Other people telling you what to do, that's gone. So to the YouTube, listener, the best we can do is to make the cost for the Russians to continue this war to be so high so Putin understands that there is nothing to gain from this. It's better to stop now and start a discussion with the Ukrainians. That's the only way forward. Nothing else will stop Putin. Nothing else.
Good. I think we have time for a few more questions. So please, to this side.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Rebecca Riveros-Dimberg. I introduce myself because I'm not so famous like you. But I have two questions. One is, how is Sweden carrying out its refugee policy today, considering that Sweden has traditionally been a host country, I will say the main one in Europe, especially in the 70s. The question is not the theme of today, of course, but I'm sure that NATO always is keeping his eyes over the refugees, why and where they are going, right? So that's one. And the second one is, when you talk about Russia, do you think the decisions to join NATO is precisely because of Russia's oscillation between war or little war? Mainly because the one who leads the country, Putin, has no ideology or principles, since what he has are operations. There are two. Thank you.
If I start with the second question, I absolutely think that Putin has a view, an ideology. He wants, to achieve something. And if we have listened to him, he has spoken about Novaya Russia for a certain, for a long, long time. I think he wants to show his population that he's a strong leader, that Russia is back on the world scene, and also that Russia is taking back territory as they seem to be unfairly taken away from them. The problem with that is, if, let's say that, okay, they do something and the Russian says, okay, fine, we stop here, that's it, and everyone is happy ever after. That's not how it works. When you're riding a nationalistic tiger, that tiger is running faster and faster. And the appetite of the Russian bear will only increase while it's eating. So the more it eats, the hungrier it will be. And I think it's extremely important for us to understand that. That's the logic in politics. That's the logic of this. So there is a case for stopping this kind of imperialistic thirst, because it will go out of hand. When it comes to refugee situation, I think it's very important that the European Union, actually an area where also the European Union is coming together and find a much better system of dealing with it. You're right, Sweden has a long history and tradition of being very open. And now we're talking about refugees, not work immigrants. We're talking about refugees, right? But at this Syrian crisis, where lots of people came to Europe, and very few countries were open for the refugees, more or less only Germany and Sweden. The other countries did not receive them. They were just receiving them and say, hey, you cannot stay here, but we give you a bar of chocolate, and that's the direction to Germany and Sweden. Pretty exactly what happened in some countries, And that turned out to be, too overwhelming for both Germany, I would say, and also for Sweden. So in the elections afterwards, it was a clear message from the voters in Sweden that we are absolutely open for helping refugees in the future, but it has to be orderly mannered. And both in Germany you have this saying, Ordnung muss sein. And I would say, Swedes are the same. So when the Swedish people saw that lots of people are coming and we don't really have the control over it and we don't really know how to integrate them all, there was a pushback from the electorate saying, we need to take control over this. And there is now a strong majority in the Swedish parliament that we should have a kind of, in intelligence terms, a strategic pause and, make it right, integrate them that we have, and then, talk about it in the future. Still, Sweden is accepting a lot of refugees, so the borders are not closed to Sweden, definitely not. But it's different than before, absolutely.
Thank you. Back to this side.
Thank you for taking time every day, Ambassador, to come and talk to us today. My name is Dharma, and I am a second-year graduate student in the National Security Program here. European security has a special place in my heart, so I'm glad that you're here to talk to us today. My question for you is, so despite the substantial aid provided to Ukraine by European countries like Sweden, a major challenge has been identified, which is the lack of interoperability among donated weapon systems like with artillery systems to Ukraine. These systems, they often differ in design, requiring extensive retraining, and causing delays in deployment, which reduces their effectiveness on the battlefield. In your opinion, what should be done more to promote standardization and reduce interoperability issues in future defense cooperation, not just with Ukraine, but with other European partners as well?
No, I think you're pointing on a very, very good thing. Basically two reasons why it is like this. Every country is, of course, in the beginning when we looked at Ukraine, we said, okay, we need to see what can we deliver. And you went into your barn and put them together and sent it to Ukraine. And it was good at that time because they didn't have much, right? But of course, it was not super efficient doing it like that. It has been better. NATO is taking, a responsibility in kind of, I don't know what you call that, but putting all the pieces together and find a way of, like they say to us, okay, thank you very much, Sweden, for offering that kind of product, but it doesn't really fit into what we're doing now, so focus on something else. So we are much better today than we were before. So that's part of the problem. The other problem is that Europe has too many different standards. We have too many different kind of ammunition, too many different kind of infantry wagons or whatever you call them, and tanks and so on. So there is a mismatch in Europe as such. And that is what I'm talking about when I'm a little bit optimistic about Europe, that we do understand that. Is it easy? No. Because what does it mean? It means that Sweden, Italy, France, Germany, in this case also UK actually, Spain. These are the big countries like in defense industry. We need to sit and talk to each other, and I'm pretty sure the French people will say, can you stop doing JAS Gripen in Sweden and we can buy a Rafale in the future? Right? Or we will tell them, that, hey, Germans, can you stop doing your submarines your way, do it the Swedish way? It's not an easy conversation. Okay? It's not. But it's there. And there has to be that kind of standardization where we actually come together and don't make 18 different kind of versions of certain things. It's going in the right direction, but you're absolutely right. It is a problem. It is a problem.
Larry has given me the signal that
But
we're out of
we have
time.
some more.
But
Quick.
But I do want to get to
I
two
hate
questions.
to leave, okay.
So, if we could do the lightning round, give a quick
Yes.
question,
Yeah, it's a
and
quick
then we can
question. It's
continue
a
the
quick
conversation.
question. I won't even introduce myself. You argue that those who commit sabotage in the Baltic Sea, there should be a cost
Yeah.
to it.
Yes.
Has Sweden figured out who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? And if it turned out to be the United States, what is the cost? What should be the cost to the Americans?
No, we don't have an answer to the question who blew up Nord Stream. There are lots of theories and lots of ideas out there, but we are not sure who did it. Nope.
Are you still looking?
Let's say like this. Even if there is a new Nord Stream built and you have another pipeline, it will not be a question in Sweden that we should hook ourselves up. Because as the Liberal Party leader once said in Sweden, there are only two things that are wrong with the Russian gas. It's gas and it's Russian.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well done. Well done. And our final question, please.
Okay. Earlier, you were talking about the influx of refugees to Sweden, particularly those from regions affected by conflict and instability. How does that influx of refugees, how is it shaping Sweden's domestic security considerations, and are there challenges related to the potential radicalization or import of social tensions?
I think that is very much a political debate, I would say. I cannot, as an ambassador, tell you what is the right answer to that, because that's highly a political issue. You could find politicians in Sweden who says that's not a problem at all. You could find a politician that says that is a super big problem in Sweden. I think, to be totally honest with you, I think Sweden is very well placed because of the society we have. And I'm talking about the society that is, you call it a welfare state here, but I would call it, giving people a lot of chances in their lives, supporting them. I think we are better placed than many others to handle threats of, radicalization, whatever it comes from, because of the structure of our society. I don't think, of course you can find people that say it's not really a problem at all, but I think most people recognize this today, that there are, and it doesn't need to be related to refugees. I saw on Netflix the other day, Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma bombings, the shootings that you started it all with in Örebro, where lots of students were killed in a school by a Swedish guy, and we still don't know what the purpose was. We don't really know why. So I think it is very much of a kind of a political debate, how you want to paint the challenges and the threats. If you have a certain political kind of views, you kind of frame it in a certain way. And if you have another political color, you frame it in another way. But I would say I think a vast majority of the Swedish people do believe that our society is actually pretty well suited in giving people extra chances and life chances that is decreasing the risk of radicalization and extremism. Whatever kind of extremism you're talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Are
you.
we done?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent.
So thank you, Mr. Ambassador. That was very generous of you to give the time, and you made our audience happy by taking all their questions. I'm usually I walk up here with a scythe ready to
You're
cut
the bad
everybody
guy.
down. I'm the bad guy at the end. But so thank you very much. We do have food and drink waiting across the ways. I would ask the audience to please exit, allow our guests here to make their way to the room. Don't corner them up here. Wait and corner them in the room with the food and the drinks. So just one last round of applause to our guests, and thank you very much.